combination of all the arts. Exist. Due to the fragile nature of film, our motion picture history is being destroyed. Until 1952, motion pictures were printed on flammable nitrate film. Nitrate film is similar in chemical composition to gunpowder. It can spontaneously combust just by opening the film's container. Throughout the history of motion pictures, there have been incidences of nitrate film bursting into flames, burning down theaters, and sometimes fatally injuring movie audiences. There have been numerous film archives around the world that have had their vaults destroyed because of nitrate film explosion. In 1971, the original nitrate negative to Orson Welles' classic Citizen Kane was destroyed by fire. Nitrate film can also become brittle or shrink, as is the case with the original elements to Gone with the Wind. In some scenes of the film, the original matrices have shrunken so badly that they are difficult to print from. The dyes used to make color film have become unstable and are losing their original color. The original negatives and prints of My Fair Lady, The Sound of Music, Patton, and 2001 are fading away. Movies, the most popular of all art forms, the reflection of our lives, our inspirations, our hopes, our dreams, are slowly drifting away from us. Hollywood still flourishes, film industries in other countries have not been as fortunate. The German cinema gained worldwide attention with the release of a film that exemplified the Expressionist art movement. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, released in 1919, was the catalyst for over a decade of expressionistic masterpieces. The Golem, as well as Caligari and Nosferatu, were all vivid examples of the German cinema of the fantastic. In 1926, Germany's most prestigious director, Fritz Lang, had a vision of what our future might be like. Lang had just completed a highly successful 6-hour version of Der Nibelungen. His next film had to surpass this grand historical epic, so instead of looking back at history for a subject, he looked instead to the future. While traveling to New York with his wife and collaborator, Thea von Harbo, Lang found his inspiration. Looking from the deck of his approaching ship, he said to his wife, "I would like to make a film about this city set far in the future." Moment of inspiration, his wife Thea wrote a novel entitled Metropolis. The next year, Lang began production. Filming for Metropolis began in the spring of 1925 and continued until October of 1926. The film shooting schedule ran 310 days. There were well over 36,000 men, women, and children used as extras throughout the film. Metropolis was to become the biggest science fiction spectacle ever filmed, as well as the film that Fritz Lang was to be most remembered for. It was announced as the costliest and most ambitious picture ever screened in Europe. The film premiered in Berlin on January 10th, 1927, to a packed house. However, when the film was released in other countries, it was reduced in running time, as in the case of the version that was seen in the United States. It was cut from 17 reels of film to 10. In other words, 70 minutes of the film were removed. This was done so that American exhibitors could fit more screenings of the film into a day's time and thus turn over bigger profits. Unfortunately, this shortened version is the only footage that was known to survive. Until recently, the film was thought to be missing almost half of its intended footage. Thus, surviving prints were a pale reflection of the original. The reason for this? World War II. A major deterrent to the film's existence was the takeover of the German film industry by Hitler's regime. The Nazis immediately exercised full control over the German film industry. Supervisory departments were set up to examine the political background and racial origin of the German film industry's employees. From the moment of Hitler's takeover, no Jew could be employed in any capacity within the new German film industry. Talented artists fled Germany, fearing for their lives. Among the many who left were Max Reinhardt, Konrad Veidt, and Marlene Dietrich. Being partly of Jewish descent, Fritz Lang also left, but not without first making a statement against the impending doom that he envisioned that the Nazis would bring. Lang's film, The Last Will of Dr. Mabuse, made in 1932, was in his own words, an allegory to show Hitler's processes of terrorism. Slogans and doctrines of the Third Reich have been put into the mouths of criminals in the film. Thus, I hope to expose the masked Nazi theory of the necessity to deliberately destroy everything which is precious to people. Then, when everything collapsed and they were thrown into utter despair, they would try to find help in the new order. The Nazis banned the film, and Lang left Germany. Soon, even Metropolis was banned, like so many other great German films, on the grounds that Jews had had a major participation in their production. Many German film lovers who did not share Hitler's views hid films from the Nazis. Some were smuggled into other countries for their safekeeping. Many films found their way to France. But when the Nazis occupied France, they once again had to be hidden. Many films were stored away in empty buildings or buried to prevent their confiscation and destruction by the Nazis. Because of the Nazis, Germany's film classics were scattered throughout the world. A contemporary film lover concerned about the welfare of classic German films, and in particular Metropolis, was composer Giorgio Moroder.
Metropolis used to be my favorite movie. I saw it when I was, I think, 15, 16. I saw it later on again. And I loved a bunch of old movies, Murnau and Potemkin, but Metropolis was my favorite one.
In 1981, Moroder began a 3-year search for the missing footage to Metropolis.
I found some very interesting pieces in Australia, in Canberra. I found some pieces in Los Angeles with John Hampton, and in New York, the Museum of Modern Art.
For over 40 years, John Hampton has run perhaps the only surviving silent movie theater in the world. He maintains what is believed to be the largest collection of silent films in private hands. Many film scholars from around the world have visited John's theater. It is one of the few places film lovers can go to see silent films.
We actually began the thing, it goes way back to when I was a kid. 1923, I had a silent movie show in my home. My brother and I ran a show there at that time for kids in the neighborhood every Friday night. And my love for silent films was nailed down tight at that point. I'd had an ambition to have some kind of a movie show as a kid. We started this theater, actually we opened it in February the 25th, 1942. I'll never forget that date because that was the day after Los Angeles was supposedly bombed by the Japanese. Giorgio was called up on the phone, and curiously, I didn't even connect him with the Moroder that wrote the music. I'd heard about it, and I had quite a few records of his, including Love to Love You Baby. I liked his music. He had a disco, had a very unique style of music, and I'm always looking for things like that, and I had these records, but I hadn't paid that much attention. I'm still back in the horse and buggy days of movies, and I don't keep up with modern musicians or other artists as much as I should. But it finally dawned on me that when he told me he composed music, and he did the music for Midnight Express, and I finally woke up to the fact that this was the Giorgio Moroder. And he was looking for Metropolis, and I had the 35 millimeter print of the American version, and he was looking for all that he could find. At that point, he wanted every scrap of film in existence on it.
Taking the footage he found with John Hampton, Moroder then incorporated all of the newly found footage with the surviving footage found in the United States. This made the most complete version of the film possible. At the same time, this version was closer to the original version of Metropolis than anything previously seen in over 50 years. Now that the basic reconstruction of the film was completed, he set out to put on the finishing touches. One important task that Moroder had to do before he could present his restoration to the public was to record a new musical score for the 57-year-old silent movie, an area in which he was very familiar.
I started to record in '82, doing the basic tracks. Then slowly I thought I should have lyrics and songs. So it was a very long period of time where I was trying out different things. I had the score at the beginning was quite different from now, and I used the new technique, the digital recording. And I think I was one of the first to be able to put the music direct from the digital recording into the optical film. So I think the quality of the recording is very good.
Besides writing a new score for the film, Moroder decided to enrich his score by utilizing the talents of some of today's most contemporary musicians.
The final artists are Pat Benatar, Billy Squier, Adam Ant, Loverboy, Freddie Mercury, Bonnie Tyler, a group called Cycle 5, and John Anderson.
An early supporter of the Metropolis project was film archivist Dan Woodruff.
Abel-Gance's Napoleon was perhaps the catalyst for the renaissance that the silent film is having today. It's interesting, while I was doing research on Napoleon prior to its recent reissue, I found that there were 10 different versions of the film since it was first released in 1927. Some of these were reissue versions, some of these were reissue versions with dialogue, something that was very popular to do with silent films in the 30s when talkies first came in. Some of these were export versions for different countries, and some of these were versions for the non-theatrical market. When I first saw what Giorgio was doing with Metropolis, I was very interested. I used to run silent films in college for a cinema club with rock scores, and so I knew what he was going after. I think the important thing to do is to keep a film alive. It would be a shame if a film did not last to the point in time in the future that it was depicting in the film. For almost a year now, I have seen the different versions of Metropolis that Giorgio's been able to find throughout the world. There's the German version that Ino Padalas has done that's different from the Museum of Modern Art version.
The only differences I noticed between the MoMA version and the Australian is that some of the shots were not really identical, the same scene, but like on the MoMA, Fredo walks out to the left, and on the Australian, he walks out to the right. So I think they just shot it twice, the same scene twice.
The one important difference of the print Moroder found in Australia with other surviving versions was that it was in color. By using the Australian print as a guide, Moroder was able to restore original color techniques to the film which were popular at the time of Metropolis's original release in 1927.
Well, one technique is called tint and tone, and while I was doing that, by coincidence, I saw a little movie of a frame-per-frame colored old silent movie, and it looked incredibly well, so I thought I should do that thing which they did in the 20s, and so by using a system called rotoscope, I put color in about 4 or 5 minutes.
Another innovative technique Moroder used in adapting his new version of Metropolis was to eliminate the film's title cards and replace them with subtitles. This he did after he discovered a print of Metropolis that was made in France during the early 30s.
One day in my research for new footage, I went to San Diego, and I had a chance to look at the movie, a 9.5 millimeter copy, and the first 10 minutes I noticed something different from the usual film. And finally, I saw that they had subtitles. So that somehow inspired me.
Inspiration has long been a part of the Metropolis project. In fact, it was the inspiration of Metropolis's story, the film that Moroder saw as a boy, that was becoming more realistic as he grew older.
Actually, in this age of machines, computers, it's the struggle between the workers against the machine, and I think that's what's happening somehow today.
And so the story of Metropolis is revealed to a new generation. Artistically, the film represents the pinnacle of the golden age of the German cinema. The film's visual achievement has rarely been surpassed. But perhaps more important is the film's message of peace, which is a universal lesson in survival. While motion picture history is crumbling around us, another work of cinematic art has been resurrected from the rubble. The preservation of Metropolis is one step in what must be done in order to save our motion pictures. Imagine if all the great paintings of the world were to fade away, if music were to suddenly lose its tone, if poetry were to lose its meaning. Yet the most important art form of our time is disintegrating before our eyes. We must save this precious art form from its own self-destruction for the future.